one of the reasons that the Polarex Unitron telescopes are so popular with collectors is that they come with an enormous array of accessories. So we've had a look at some of them during the restoration. There's the astrograph. There's also a Polaroid type camera that comes with them as well. There are balances for balancing the tube, sun projection screens, all sorts of things. Now, to mount these on the main body of the scope, Polarex Unitron, actually Nihon Seiho was the original manufacturer, produced a whole load of rings so that you could hang these things off the main scope. So we'll just go through these now. These are the rings for mounting the balance. This is a sliding counterweight for when you're changing the eyepiece fittings. So if you're putting one of the rotating turrets on that weighs a fair bit, you want to balance that out. Alternatively, you might be fitting a camera, so you need to have the change in weight accounted for that. And just use the sliding counterweight at the top of the tube to counteract the effect of the extra weight at the eyepiece or at the focuser end. These are the rings for the astrograph. These are probably the best in the best condition of all the rings. A lot of them are going to need extensive restoration work, but that's all part of the journey. These are the rings for the 4-inch guide scope. This red coloration on one of them, I think, is a lead-based primer. We haven't used lead-based primers for a long time, so I think this probably goes back all the way to the first non-institutional owner of the scope, who was restoring it. These two rings have got a set of piercings on them, and initially I thought the piercings were for these two arms here. So these are designed to hold the declination and RA lock and the slow motion controls for those two directions or movements as well. But if you look, the radius that these are designed for is slightly smaller than the ring. In fact, I think these rings are actually designed for the guide scope rings, and in fact the holes match up pretty well. Okay, so how do we fix these guys onto the scope? Are there some rings missing? Well, potentially not. Going on, we have these two rings which have got what I think is probably the sunscreen projection fitting, and the fitting for the 2-inch viewfinder. All right, so are we missing some rings or not? So the easiest thing to do would be to ask the previous owner, but unfortunately I'm up at the cabin at the moment, and so I don't have any telecommunications, so I can't give him a call. I had to think about this, and I remembered something else that I'd seen which puzzled me a bit, and that was the focuser. So the focuser has got two different size holes drilled in it, okay? And these correspond to the holes in the tube that I repaired. I thought about it, I thought, why are there these large holes as well as the smaller holes? And then finally the penny dropped, and these arms are actually designed to sit on the focuser. They don't have a separate ring for themselves. So problem solved. In fact, I should have realised that the previous owner, who was a professional astronomer, would have told me if there was anything missing. He's a very straight up and down guy, and so I should have known that everything was here and available. Okay, quite a bit of work to do on these. Even with the astrographs, there are a few nibbles and nicks that I want to astrograph arms. There are a few nibbles and nicks I want to repair. Most of the thumb screws for fitting the guide scopes and the viewfinder are okay, but there's a fair bit of brassing on the other wing nuts, and I'll be replating those, and obviously a lot of repainting to do as well. But that's all part of the challenge and all part of the fun. So we're back in Brisbane again. Rather than show you the individual renovations of each of the individual rings, which I think would probably be a little bit of overkill, I'm just going to show you the process with one set of rings. So these are the most complex rings, I think. They're for the 50 millimeter guide scope and the sun projection screen rod holder. So it's in fairly good nick. There's a bit of paint loss here and there. There's some tarnishing on some of the nuts holding the accessory holders onto the main ring. I think that'll probably I won't replate those guys. I've replated the thumb screws, or I'm in the process of replating the thumb screws on the rod holder up here. The adjustment screws for the 50mm finder are pretty good as they are. So what I'm going to do is strip the whole thing down and give it a good wash, first of all in soapy water. Then I'll roughen up the remaining black paint and take the chipped areas back to bare metal and smooth them off before I spray paint everything. So in the traditions of the field, here's what I prepared earlier. So I've taken off the rod holder. I've separated the two halves of the ring. We've got the nuts off here. So this is the sort of tarnish that I'm going to have to remove. As I said, there's not much pitting on them. I don't think I'm going to replate those. Oh, this is the scope holder as well. Okay, onwards and upwards. I removed some of the flaking and damaged paint from the rings now. One of the things that really struck me was that the actual attachment to the scope, so the very broad, heavy rings, the paint is in really pretty good condition. But the accessory holders themselves, so the viewfinder holder and the rod holder, have got a lot of paint damage on them. It's kind of odd as well, because at first sight the paint looked okay, but then when I started abrading it a little bit, it was just coming away in great big swaths. So I think what's happened is that over time the accessories have maybe managed to collect a bit more dew than the rest of the rings, or maybe the paint quality on the rings was a little better. If we compare these rings to the rings for the astrograph, which are really in quite nice nick, they've got a few little grazes on them. I suspect that these were in storage. I don't think they were installed on the scope, and so they've been quite well protected. And as I said, I think that at some point the refractor of the main scope was exposed to some fairly harsh conditions, and anything that was attached to it at that point was really took a bit of a hammering. Okay, so I'll put some edge primer on these guys to cover up the metal, and we'll repaint them. So these screws, these are the screws that go into the hinge of the two halves of the rings that fit on the scope. The nickel on them looks like it's okay, but I think I might replate them anyhow. These guys, which hold the latches in place, I think I'll just paint. Whilst I'm doing the rings, I thought I would show you how I treat the metalwork where the plating is in good enough condition just to clean it up rather than replate. So there's a fair old bit of tarnish and yuck on here, and probably decades of grime as well. So what I do is I start off, I give it a little bit of a burst with an ammoniated cleaner, probably something like Ajax. I'm using Ajax spray and wipe, but anything with a bit of ammonia in it. Not all products, cleaning products, have got ammonia in, so just look at the label. So a little bit of ammonia, soft bristle brush. This is a toothbrush for sensitive teeth that I use for this. So I give it a good rinse in water, and then into vinegar, but just for 5 minutes. So I give it a 5-minute soak in vinegar. Wash again, ammoniated cleaner again, wash again, and then I just finish it off by drying and giving it a bit of a wax. So we'll see how that looks with this guy. So this is pretty scrape scungy. We'll see how it cleans up. That's come up really nicely. All that grime is gone. It's got a lovely shine on it, and I've put a little bit of soft wax to protect it into the future. So I'll do the rest of the bolts on the rings in the same fashion. So I think this is probably nickel plating rather than chrome plating. It's not quite as bright as the plating that I see on the wing nuts, and it stood up pretty well. Interestingly, if you don't do the pre-treatment with the ammoniated cleaner, the vinegar doesn't seem to do nearly as good a job. You have to scrub for a lot longer to get it clean. And I reckon after it's been in vinegar, it's just sensible to give it a squirt with something with ammonia in, just to remove the last of the acid and neutralize it. So yeah, no, that's really nice. So I suspect probably what's happening with the ammoniated cleaner is that you may be making complexing with the nickel that's there, making nickel transition complexes, and just helping brightening it up a bit. So in the clock forums that I also frequent, there's a lot of people who use ammoniated cleaners for brass because they think that they say that it produces a much brighter finish at the end. So pleased with that. This ring is finished now. I've polished it up and waxed it. It's come up well. The thumb screws and the screws holding the accessory holders onto the ring are nice and bright. All that chipping has been smoothed out and repainted. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. The other rings are done as well. I don't have the thumb screw for the projection screen holder here at the moment, but that's up at the dark sky cabin, and we'll have a look at that. So the rings were actually probably the thing that has taken the most time and has been the most difficult. Like the cradle, getting the cradle off the mount was tough, but there were just so many bits and pieces to clean up and polish and replate. But I'm happy with the way it's all turned out, and we'll take a little bit of a video of all the rings laid out before they go onto the scope, and you see them in operation. The accessory rings are all finished off now. So they've been repainted, replated, and in one case I've put some new padding on them because the old green bays had gone. The easiest was the support for the astrograph. So these guys just had a few little nicks and nibbles out of them, which I patched up and then gave a coat of clear to. The sun projection screen supports, the replating on those was nice and bright, came up pretty well. The support for the 4-inch guide scope, that all looks quite nice as well. That ridginess on the one of them that had been machined quite hard, I ground back down again, looks good. I think my favorite renewal was for the guide scope. Sorry, for the control rod systems. So these had that characteristic powdery. It's almost like a rust that aluminium can develop. So I ground that back to bare metal again, and then repainted it. I also replated these cams that lock the arms in place, and they turned up very nicely. So they were, I think, probably the most rewarding, most satisfying restoration of the rings. As I said in a previous video, this is probably the thing that's taken the most time because there's so many different parts and they need to be disassembled and painted separately, then reassembled. There's a fair bit of replating and polishing to do, but all done now, and so they can go onto the main scope and we can put everything together.